Thanks very much for that, Fergus and Helen, and thanks everybody for joining us for a brown bag lunchtime launch. For those that are munching through their lunches now, it is that time, and we hope that the space that we have here today for the next 55 minutes or so will be an info where people will get to ask questions, put ideas to us, and test out some of your own thinking on some of the issues raised. I'm delighted here to represent both 80/20 and in partnership with Helen and Fergus and the team in NALA as part of the launch of Facts Matters, a new course on critical media literacy in today's very unequal world. As part of that, we're lucky enough to have some wonderful speakers with us today. And as you may have seen from the agenda, we have who's an adult literacy ambassador based in Donegal, if I'm not mistaken, Catherine. And Catherine is going to be starting off the interventions. Followed by Catherine will be Orla Ryan of the journal.ie. Orla is a titan in journalism and has been active on global issues, local issues, social justice issues, and tackling facts as part of an age of misinformation and the various things that appear on the dashboard in the journal on a daily basis. We'll be hearing from Orla as well. Lastly, we'll be hearing then from Joan Fitzpatrick from the adult literacy world from Kildare and Wicklow Education and Training Board. We've had the pleasure of working with Joan and with more than 20 adult literacy tutors to develop what is the final version of Facts Matter. So it'll be great to hear that perspective from the tutor side as well. The plan is for everybody to make short interventions, roughly 7 minutes each, and then there should be about 15 minutes for some questions and answers. So that'll take us into around 1:30, just after. Then Helen Ryan from NALA will be closing. Just to let you know as well that the actual production of what was and what is Facts Matter is based on the support of the annual grants round from Irish Aid, which has been instrumental for us to take what Mike Ryan's phrase, you may have heard it before, but he says we need a vaccine against misinformation. We've been able to engage with some of that material in a literacy context. As we head into the wreckage of what is another phrase you may have heard is an infodemic, the rise of a huge amount of information that is being floated, and whether we can make sense of it, whether it's sensible, whether it's based on facts or otherwise, is part of the challenge of engaging in education work today, let alone as readers, where we're always learning. So it is as a result of that support. I should also say a chance encounter. There was a workshop roughly two and a half years ago that Helen and myself were at, and we managed to have a sidebar conversation. That particular workshop was on a similar topic from a resource called Beyond the Click, which was an online toolkit, and it was in human rights education to tackle disinformation. And it was in a sidebar conversation with Helen that we decided to engage in this potential for exploring a toolkit, but also a guide and worksheets and a very hands-on practical resource for adult literacy tutors more widely. So that's just the general introduction, really, to let you know that this is on the basis very much of a frustration and a gap and a need to do something. I think as educators over the last few years, we've been I think the phrasing overwhelmed is not an understatement in terms of trying to keep up with things as they've been changing, let alone trying to select what should we focus on. You know, what's the big thing that we need to bring into our teaching spaces to challenge, to try and address some of the questions about technology, social media, and it isn't just about what's healthy use of particular social media, Twitter. It isn't just about knowing how to write a tweet. It's very much about all things that go with reading Twitter, looking at other tweets, talking about it together, having a response. So trying to make healthy choices in terms of information. So that's I just wanted to say that up front. So there's many people who are going to say who have been involved, and we're delighted to introduce this to others. So without further ado, I'm going to pass to our first speaker now. As I mentioned, I'm going to pass on to Catherine, and Catherine's going to take us away now for a moment. And again, feel free to ask questions if you have something in your mind, something been bothering you, something interesting coming out in what's being said, or if you're skim reading the pack that's been in the works for a number of years now. Feel free to kind of dig into that for some detail as well. But you're very welcome. It's a conversational space, and very much it's your time. So yeah, without further ado, Catherine, over to you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Helen and I were actually talking this morning, and obviously when social media sort of took off, everybody was very quick to go on Facebook. But I suppose what we didn't realize was the actual danger of the fake news. We didn't sort of know. And for example, there was the local hotels here would put up competitions, and I would have entered them. It would be maybe a night away or 2 nights away, or possibly maybe evening dinner, and you'd have clicked into the link, and you'd have said, oh, yeah, I'll share this, and then it would have come up maybe half an hour later to say that I had won. So I would have phoned up the local hotel, and I says, oh, you know what, this is Catherine here, and I'd entered your competition and I had won. And obviously I was delighted. But then following that, they had said, oh no, Catherine, somebody has set up a fake page. So, it's not easy to know the difference between, the fake page and the real page. Now this, and obviously I would struggle with technology. So yeah, this definitely now, it would have knocked my confidence. I wouldn't have been as quick to enter any competitions on social media after. Matter of fact, actually, I didn't enter any at all. Yeah, so it's just, you know what? Sometimes it's just hard to digest the truth from the fake news.
Great, Catherine. Sorry, but we looked like we were frozen there for a minute, did we? That's brilliant. Look, absolutely. And Catherine, just because I think you just mentioned there about struggling a little bit with trying to find the information sometimes, and then trying to assess that, because we heard that last week actually from a health literacy survey. What sort of suggestions and tips would you say to anyone that you would engage with, say down the local literacy centre or whatever? Are there any tips that you would give them?
Oh, do you know what? I would read it. I would double check everything, Helen. Just double check everything. Read it 3 or 4 times, just to make sure.
And when you had a look, I know I sent you up in the post the Facts Matters, the guide there that obviously we're launching today for tutors and to work with learners. Was there anything in it when you flicked through because there's a lot of detail in it that sort of jumped out at you that you'd like to, as a student, maybe delve a little bit more into?
Well, obviously now, Helen, with us all doing the digitals in the class, it was all the fake news, Helen. It was, it was sort of what to watch out for. Yeah, we all enjoyed that, Helen, actually.
No, absolutely. And I suppose, Tony, is there anything else that you want before we move on to it? I think we'll come back, Catherine, with a couple of questions as we go through it, but that was really useful. No, I think it's it just reminds all of us of the information, too much of it, that we're trying to deal with at the minute, firstly, and then second of all, just trying to work out if what we're reading is correct, and is it opinion, is it fact? We were talking about that earlier as well. So Tony, I'll hand back over to you now.
That's great. Thanks for that, Helen. Hopefully my connection's a bit better now, everyone. It's, you know, we're in the connectivity age, and I think it's okay to admit that my connection's not working. Just like I think Catherine's point about being able to put your hand up and say, I've been caught out. It's okay to admit that you have been caught out. And I think it's better to bring it out than to bury it and say nothing. And this capacity to reflect and address what might be something that surprised you or that you were caught by is actually a really strong part of your own learning and learning together on this question is very important. So thanks for those reflections, Catherine, and questions are absolutely welcome further along the line. So on to our next speaker, somebody who is at the front line of addressing the kinds of things that Catherine mentioned, which is Orla Ryan from the journal.ie. Orla, we're absolutely delighted to have you here joining us. And for those of us that have been involved in education work, the journal.ie's fact-checking unit and your journalism is nothing new in terms of our day-to-day work. So we're very, very welcome to have you here. So yeah, I'll pass it over to you now. If you're back with us there, fantastic. So Orla, I believe the space we've invited you to talk to is certainly around how we can fight back against misinformation, which I suspect is kind of a tough thing to answer in 7 minutes, but you're very welcome to give it a good shot. So yeah, thanks for joining us.
Thanks very much, Tony. Happy to be here today. Yes, as you said, I'm going to be looking at, I suppose, how you can identify misinformation and to stop the spread of it. But before I get into that, I just want to talk a little bit about the work that the journal does and a little bit on why people spread misinformation in the first place, because that's a good way of helping people to spot it. So the journal started fact-checking back in 2016. This was in the lead up to the Irish general election and the US presidential election, which would go on to see Donald Trump elected. And we all know what that did for the wider conversation around misinformation globally. In those 5 years, the prevalence and the type of misinformation that we deal with has changed drastically. In the early days of the Fact Check project, we were primarily fact-checking claims made by politicians in the Dáil or Seanad or television. However, since early last year, the onset of the pandemic, our fact check work has not been exclusively focused on the pandemic, but the majority of the work has been on COVID-19 misinformation. Ireland is somewhat lucky in the sense that misinformation did not catch on in the same way it did in other countries, such as the US. However, since the start of the pandemic nearly 2 years ago, misinformation has never been more widely shared in Ireland. Some people have used the pandemic and people's very valid concerns and fears to deliberately create false information to dupe others or to see how far a rumor goes. In a series last year, the journal explored the prevalence of false information in Ireland and why people share it. So we've all probably received a WhatsApp message in the last 18 months that's been forwarded from a concerned family member or friend who's sending it on just in case it's true. Most people who share incorrect information like this do so unwittingly and without any malicious intent. This is the spreading of misinformation. However, some people intentionally share incorrect information, sometimes for their own entertainment, or as I said, just to see how far a rumor will grow, will it get legs? But sometimes people want to sow panic, and this is disinformation. Some people also use the term fake news, but I'm not mad about this phrase myself because it's kind of lost all meaning in the Trump era because he and others labeled anything they didn't like fake news rather than accurate but inconvenient. So for the series in 2020, I spoke to psychologists about why people share fake news or misinformation, disinformation. So they said several factors can play a role. Our biases and the echo chambers we create, we're all probably guilty of that online unwittingly. You know, we're fed things by the algorithm that we've already engaged with. So, you know, our worldview is reinforced constantly. There's groupthink, fear, anxiety, and fatigue played a huge role, especially at the start of the pandemic when we had no idea what we were dealing with and people were really worried about what was coming down the tracks. Some people are just trying to be helpful. They might send something saying, look, this is probably not true, but I'm just sending it on in case. Some people want to be part of the conversation. They don't want to feel like they've been left behind and they're not engaging with what's going on in the news. Warwick Walsh, a behavioral psychologist who I spoke for an article last year, said many factors could be at play when a person knowingly or unknowingly shares information. He was talking about two different types of bias: a cognitive bias, where individuals create their own subjective reality, and a confirmation bias. So that's a tendency to seek out and favor information that confirms the beliefs we already have. So we can go, actually, yeah, I'm right about that because all my friends think this, or all my friends are posting the same thing on Facebook, so it must be right. He used a good example of, thinking of your whole online presence as comparing it to a streaming service. So, for example, if you're on Netflix or Spotify, anything that's suggested to you is something similar to what you've already engaged with. So, you're probably not going to be suggested something that's wildly different to something that you've already shown an interest in. And the same thing happens with Facebook or Instagram or Twitter, where a lot of people get some and sometimes all of their news. So all of the suggested posts, they usually reinforce something you already believe. So then that creates that bias of, oh, well, I'm right. Everybody's saying this. All my friends are saying this. The news platforms I follow, or, public profiles I follow, are all saying the same thing. So now to move on to how we can actually stop the spread of this, so how people can spot misinformation, and how to talk to somebody who's maybe sharing misinformation. So a lot of misinformation is easy to spot, but some posts are designed to look as real as possible, or they might contain one part of information that's actually correct, but then it's exaggerated, or important details are left out. So then it's harder to realize if it's entirely false, or is it, half true. So as well as doing fact checks in the last year or so, particularly related to COVID misinformation, the journal has an article on how to spot misinformation, and basically some helpful tips that can be good if you are worried about a family member, maybe to send on the article and say, not to condescend to them and say you're completely wrong, but say, well, actually, have you read this? And maybe this is something to think about. The same with the Facts Matter booklet. That's a good way of starting a conversation with a loved one, saying, well, have you read this? So there's some interesting points here if you want to take a look. So some of the most important things to consider when you're looking at information and trying to decide if it's correct or not, the most important one that always comes up is what or who is the source. If the publication you've never heard of, or if it's not linking back to an original study or comment or interview or whatever it might be, then it might not be real. Is it a reputable source? Is it a website you've never heard of? Is it linking back to a thread online rather than an academic journal or a reputable news outlet? So that's a really important thing. The second one is to read more than the headline. That's a pet peeve of mine as a journalist, because you very often see online people have clearly just read the headline of an article. They've not read the body, and the headline might be missing context, or maybe it's been misinterpreted, or people are getting very exercised about whatever the headline states without actually reading the article. And there's often context that obviously you can't fit in the headline, that maybe if you read through you'll be like, okay, actually that's not what it is. And then there are some publications that run headlines that are just completely false, but people share it, they don't click in and realize that the source that they're using, if they're using any source, is not actually reliable. Another important thing is to check the details and the date of an event. So some stories are not completely fake, but they're distortions of previous events. So that's, again, like when there's that grain of truth in there. So people are more confused as to whether or not it happened, because they might Google it and be like, oh, that's not exactly what happened, but something similar happened in England last year, or whatever it might be. So then they think, well, this is more likely to be true because something similar happened at another point in time. And another important one is to ask yourself, how does it make you feel? So the pandemic, as I said, particularly at the start of that, people were panicked, people were anxious, people were very stressed and worried and didn't know what was going to happen. So if a post is designed to make you feel really angry, scared, or shocked, chances are it's done intentionally to make you more likely to share it, because people want engagement on their pages. They want a post to go viral. So if something is phrased in a way that's going to make you really angry or scared, you're more likely to share it, either publicly or pop it in your family WhatsApp group and saying, oh God, is this true? We might remember at the start of the pandemic, all of the WhatsApp messages being shared saying, the army were going to be roaming the streets and shutting down all the shops and telling people to go home. And people were sharing that out of fear because this was completely unknown territory. But, you know, we knew that later that was not true at all, and people weren't bad by sending it on, they were just so scared. So if there's a post like that that's designed to make you feel scared or angry, chances are that's intentional, and it's to try and make you share something. So if you are talking to a family member or a friend or whoever might, you know, share information that's incorrect, it's really important to not condescend and just say, oh my God, I can't believe you believe that. You know, try and have a conversation with them and ask them, you know, okay, well, why do you think that? Or where did you read that or hear that? And then try and point them in direction of something like Facts Matters or the journal. We have like a monthly misinformation newsletter, or, you know, very regularly we have articles on the website that debunk something that is being widely shared on social media. So try and point them in the direction of good information rather than just saying, oh my God, I can't.
Orla, sorry, your sound is gone there, Orla. So does anyone else hear Orla there?
Her sound is gone, yeah.
Okay. Did she go on mute, or have we? You're back.
Back.
Sorry.
Don't worry.
Yeah, I'll probably finish up now anyway. Sorry about the internet connections, but yeah, as I said, it's important to not just condescend or give out to somebody, but to point them in the direction of good information. So that's why initiatives like Facts Matter are so important. So you can point people in your life to good information rather than just telling them the information they have is bad or incorrect.
Great, thank you very much for that, Orla. To say food for thought is an understatement. All kinds of top tips there from the engine room and the front line in many ways of handling misinformation. I won't call it fake news. I think your challenge in terms of language is a really interesting one, in terms of whether to call things misinformation, disinformation. What was the phrase you'd use? I was after writing it down. Inconvenient news. Inconvenient truths comes to mind. I won't use the word alternative news, but certainly inconvenient is a really interesting word to unpack how we feel about it. And feelings as part of this agenda are not outside of the management of facts, but actually part of the defence in terms of what's going on. So thank you for those interventions. I think there's we've had two very strong ones there, and I've a number of questions, but I'll come back to you. The questions and answer space, certainly, you know, towards the end, and I have a number of points. Certainly the bit about bias is very interesting as well. And how do you manage confronting it when somebody has been exposed, almost like, I don't know, almost like atomic energy or something, or kind of, you know, there's radiation being given off, you know, somebody's been exposed to it, and how do we address that in a way that doesn't push people away or push them further into echo chambers, I think is a really, really important part of what happens after exposure, but knowing full well that we encounter quite a lot. So look, happy to open up that space a little bit more in the Q&A, so thanks for that. Leaning into our last speaker is Joan Fitzpatrick from the Kildare and Wicklow Education Training Board. Joan, great to see you again as well. Thank you for joining us. Yeah, looking forward to hearing some of your perspectives with regards to, from the adult literacy practitioner perspectives, talking about teaching and facilitating learning with regards to media literacy. So over to you, Joan.
Thank you. I'm just going to share my screen here, and hopefully it will let me find what I want to find. Now the bar is covering. This is I'm not sure how I'm going to manage that. Hang on, can I move it? Yeah, sorry. Talking to myself here a little bit. Okay, so can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, we're good to go. Right, good afternoon then. As I said, I'm Joan Fitzpatrick. I'm a tutor with Kildare and Wicklow Education Training Board, working in Bray Adult Learning Centre. And as Tony said earlier, we did have the privilege of having Tony and Helen out to do some training with us on Facts Matter when it was in production before COVID, and it was a really useful and thought-provoking session. And you know, I'd like to thank them for producing. It's a really very comprehensive resource, a huge amount of work in it, and really it's a resource that's there kind of for your lifetime. So, and you know, Tony mentioned, you know, the language around all of this is, you know, been overwhelmed of the infodemic, the barrage of information and misinformation that's coming at us. So I suppose I'm coming at this from a tutor's perspective, and I'm very conscious that this conversation is taking place in a very, very heightened and very charged atmosphere. And so I think it's important, you know, for starters, that I'm very clear on my role as a literacy tutor in this space. First of all, not to tell learners what to think, not to catastrophize, or to add maybe to people's burdens in a situation that's stressful enough for people at the moment. My role is, as the literacy tutor's role always was, is to look at the skills, develop the skills that will enable personal development and allow people to engage in a meaningful way in their lives, in their worlds, and in the kind of social action that will help them to change their lives. We would also be very conscious that beginner readers are not beginner thinkers. And so the whole issue of bias and media literacy is not just for level 3 and, you know, level 4 students and going upwards. This is something that is relevant to all learners, regardless of their level of reading. And that it is also not the preserve of the communications tutor that this has relevance to all the modules that we're teaching. So I'm going to look at this very quickly, and I'm really struggling with the 7 minutes here under 4 headings: access to digital skills, reading the world, which is really access to information, creating content, and then, as has been said already, slowing down, making space for questions, for reflection, for thinking. And so starting with access to digital skills, we've seen the definition of literacy expanded to include digital literacy, and now we talk about digital citizenship. And we saw during lockdown how disadvantaged any of us were who didn't have the digital skills, who were almost, you know, disenfranchised. And we have worked so hard to upskill ourselves as tutors and to help our students upskill, that it's really important that we don't lose those skills now, and that we keep those digital devices in our classrooms so that we can normalize the use of them, and that we can work then on using them safely and deal with the issues that arise. We were lucky in our centre that we had my colleague Kathy Orr, who developed this module for us, Get Connected, which we use as an induction pack for all of our students now coming to classes and coming to courses, to make sure that they have the digital skills, so that, you know, it builds confidence around the use of their devices. We found it also fosters those independent thinking and learning skills, which are also key skills for media literacy. But it also just creates opportunities as we're going along for students to ask questions, like Catherine mentioned about, you know, this fake page on the fake book, to bring those issues in, to have them discussed and maybe to have them resolved. Last week I had somebody who said to me, "What is settings? People keep telling me to go to settings and I can't make sense of it." So, you know, at a suitable point in the class, we took 5 minutes to have a look at settings so that we could all see it. And what I find really useful in that is if your screen or your phone allows it, to mirror your device so that you can show and your student can follow along, rather than just having to tell them or give them a set of notes. So point 1 in upskilling people for media literacy is making sure that they can use their devices safely, and that they're not afraid of them, and that there's not this huge fear building up around what will happen to me if I go on Facebook. Second point, sorry, I have to have a drink of water, is reading the world. And I know I'm not the only literacy tutor that I have my little pet reading pieces. They're always there for me. They never let me down. But really, you know, they're grand for an emergency, but on an ongoing basis, I need to be bringing in current and relevant reading material into my classroom, so that, because the skills that I'm teaching, the skills of, you know, the phonics, the spelling rules, all of those things, they are not applied in some parallel universe. They are applied in the context of the world that we live in. So they need to be practiced in that context. And so this is just very quickly my sample in Bray at the moment. And you know, I think as well, you know, media literacy isn't just about COVID, isn't just about Trump. And so sometimes it's just good to step back and look at it in the local context. And in Bray, we are very excited because we're getting a new bridge. And if you've ever sat in the roundabout outside Bray in a traffic jam, you'd be delighted. So we're all thrilled, but maybe we're not. Because if you're a swan, it's not such good news. If you're an environmentalist, it's not such good news. So This is a local article that I can use as a teaching piece for my media skills. Loads of work to do here in pulling out facts and opinions, looking at the language of the headline, and Tony and Helen in their Facts Matter book, they have the 6 questions, the who's saying this, where's it coming from, what's the information, why is it here? The single question that I ask all the time is, what is the purpose here? What is the purpose of this piece of information? Are we giving information or are we selling a newspaper? Looking at the tone of the headline. What are the sources within the article? Can we find those websites? Can we check them to see, are they reputable websites? Can we recognize our own biases here? And that whole thing, and there's lots of really useful work in Facts Matter on unconscious bias and identifying your own bias. If I'm the car driver, if I'm the environmentalist, if I'm the parent whose child might be able to cycle safely to the schools that are down in that part of Bray, if that bridge was built, because we're all coming from somewhere. And can we recognize that? And can we maybe see the other person's point as well? Because, as I said, this is news in Bray. I would also dial it down in terms of presentation of the reading content so that I can make this accessible to beginner readers, maybe to level 2 readers, so that they can have the information, we can discuss the issue, we can go back to the newspaper and look at the headline and still talk about the tone of all of that, but they've got the reading content in a format that they can access. So I suppose what I've been doing there is practicing the skills that we need for media literacy in a context that is not so emotionally charged. And particularly, sometimes, there are people in the group who have very strong views one way or another, and you don't want to be bringing out your media skills, media literacy kit bag every time they say something. And, it's almost like they're being focused on every time, this view pops up. But this is what we do regularly. We look at all kinds of issues. This is how we analyze them, and we're just doing it again now for this issue, and it's not just when this person has something to say. I've thrown in a couple of other things as well. This is the famous text, and the reason I've kept it because it doesn't come under my heading of current, but it does beg the question about, when is a trusted family member a reliable source of information? I think that's kind of something to think about. And also, and it's already been mentioned, and it comes up again and again in the Facts Matter book, how do you feel? And I mean, again, my own experience with text like this is, I'm shocked at the degree to which the emotional response to the text overrides your rational brain and sometimes sends you off in directions that you wouldn't have gone on an ordinary day. So it's important that this is articulated in the class and that students have time to think about it and say, oh God, yeah, that's what happened when I read that text. That's why I clicked on that link. And to recognize that emotional response and to kind of, begin to step back from it and think about it and analyze it so that they can see it the next time it comes at them, and that maybe we don't have that response to it then in the same way. In terms of media literacy, it's also important to present the different types of reading experience that we are having now in terms of reading news, and increasingly more and more of us are reading our news online, and the online presentation is quite a different experience. And it's interesting to see, and this isn't just the journal, this is across the board in terms of online platforms for news and media, the percentage of the page that's taken up with the actual news. And even myself, when I looked at this the other night, I mean, the first thing I did was read the comments. I know all about the people in Donegal who are terribly annoyed because they got no train at all. And here we're getting another one up in Dublin. I checked the weather because I'm Irish. I could have bought myself a nice dress and I still wouldn't have read the news. So, looking at the features of this kind of platform and thinking about, and also, again, how this reflects the algorithms on your device, and that not everybody is having the same reading experience. So just being informed about what we're seeing. This is part of my job as a literacy tutor, to raise all of these issues. And again, another thing that's arising more and more, I was reading a thread on Twitter the other night where everybody was being very sarcastic about a newspaper headline, and in the middle of it somebody said, is this real or is this satire? Because I can't tell anymore. And this is an example. So these are two, articles on WhatsApp, on, the tyranny of the WhatsApp group, and a really useful one on how to extricate yourself from one without doing too much damage. But then you have this, which is close enough to the bounds of possibility to be true. And if you're not familiar with Waterford Whispers, so, you know, we need to be presenting this kind of information as well so that people can understand when it's a joke and when it's not. What's real and what's satire. Down here in the corner is a terrible slur on the good people of Greystones, who are all great swimmers, nearly webbed feet down there. But it comes from a Twitter hashtag, legends check their sources. And it's got a lot of these, could be maybe little nuggets that are really useful. They're just fun, but it's a good conversation starter, and it's a good kind of demonstration of the kind of stuff that gets passed around as news. So that is the reading end of things, creating content, what we used to call writing. I'm looking at the basic skills again, you know, because that's my remit as a literacy tutor, and that's where it starts. I think tone in our writing, in our online writing, is really important now, and online etiquette. And again, you know, when we got mobile phones first, I mean, the thinking at the time was it would be the death of writing. We know that you know, everybody is writing more than they ever did. We're worn out from posting and all the rest of it. So, and, you know, our students, they want to be able to engage on these online platforms. They want to be in their family WhatsApp group, but they want to be able to do it, you know, without making a show of themselves, and, you know, they want to know how it works. And because most of our learners now are on the learning platform of some sort, they're on Teams or Edmodo or something, it's a really good opportunity to practice those skills and to see how they work. I had a class the other day, and at the end of the reading piece, instead of doing another reading comprehension exercise, what they did was each of them took a character from the piece that they'd read, and they composed the text messages that the people in that story might have been sending each other as this story was developing. So lots of practice in writing at the moment, keyboard skills, finding your question marks and exclamations. But along the way, we had an opportunity to see what happens to the tone of your message when you forget to turn off your caps lock and you didn't proofread it before you hit send, and how it changes it completely. We could see how, you know, the careful use of an emoji can soften the tone. So even in those kind of informal exercises, lots to learn about how the tone changes in your messaging. I'm conscious that as tutors, we are also communicating with our students in this online forum now in a way that we wouldn't have before. It's an opportunity to model good practice. We also need ourselves to be very careful of our tone and, you know, of boundaries in terms of the content that we share and post on those. When I started teaching, formal writing would have been the preserve of the letter of application, you know, the letter of complaint. It certainly wouldn't have had anything to do with texting on your phone. We were using abbreviated language, and you wouldn't have been sending any kind of an important message on your phone. Now we are messaging work colleagues, maybe your employers, your child's school teacher. Again, all these various WhatsApp groups that people are part of. And we saw again during the lockdowns, when people couldn't go to the funerals, and they were posting messages of condolence on online platforms. So thinking about the tone of our messages is really important now and needs much more consideration than it might have done before. So back, you know, this is from a Get Writing module that we developed, but thinking about who am I writing to, what's my purpose here, and so what's the tone that I want to have when I'm doing this. And at this point, sorry, that brings us also then to the whole area of the etiquette of what we're doing online. And there's lots of really useful stuff in the Facts Matter booklet on that. But our acronym here, you know, is it true? Is it honest or, you know, hurtful? Is it illegal? Is it interesting? And a big question, how necessary is this? And, you know, and the last one then, kindness, which is hugely lacking in our online discourse. In Facts Matter as well, there's loads of useful stuff on, you know, measuring your online presence, your digital footprint, and what our posts and likes say about us and our online presence. What does it say about us? And does this matter? Who's going to be looking at it? And, you know, as somebody said, this is like a digital tattoo. Once it's there, it's there. It's not going away. And also, and I think it was mentioned already, you know, by Tony or Orla earlier, that the impact of these messages on us. Do we find, are they always making us angry? Do they make us despair? So again, how much of this is necessary? Do we need to be reading all of these comments? So, this would be a good time then to nip over to Bray Open Forum to see what are people saying about the bridge and the swans. And it's, it's good to investigate these forums and to look at the comments and to ask those questions. How much of the commentary here is adding anything at all to the argument? How much of it is necessary? Is any of it kind? And it's worth observing that the one that got the most likes was the angry text. So, and so we're stepping back and looking at it here, but then we reflected back on our own online presence and what are we putting online and what is it saying about us? Finally, and as Catherine said, when she was talking about how she engages with Facebook now, she does it again and again and again to slow down. And I think, a lot of our online activity, one of the features of it is speed. We react quickly, we do things quickly. And also, I was listening the other day I was reading something by Jennifer O'Connell, and she was saying, we've forgotten how to argue. It's the instant response, it's the angry response, and we're not teasing out arguments. And that is something really, and here I am, I've left it to the very end, but to me, it's the most important part of my classroom time and activity. Creating space. I had a mentor one time who talked to me about the value of slow learning, between your pieces of focused teaching. Allowing time just to think out loud, to form your opinion, to hear yourself forming your opinions, to listen to other people's opinions. We talked, and to create that classroom environment where nobody's condescended to, that we listen, that we encourage curiosity. And that goes back to the type of reading materials that we bring in, that we can learn about the world, serendipitous learning in a positive way. And that what we're about in all of this is we're evaluating information to see what is valuable there, what is useful to for our own understanding, not simply because we want to be the winner in the argument, the loudest voice in the argument, but that we understand ourselves, what we think, and that we can empathize. Even if we don't agree, we can empathize and at least understand where the other person is coming from, and where their fears and concerns are. And finally, this is really just, to step back, slow down, ask those 6 questions before we act, and so that we can have the bigger picture. So thank you.
That's wonderful, Joan. Thank you very much for your passionate presentation as an educationalist. And certainly, from the classroom itself, wonderful to get some of the top tips and strategies, and to hear about the debate about swans. I'm reminded of a Frank Zappa song when you say that, but anyway, that's for a different day. But it was incredibly useful to get a sense of the kinds of things that you need to work through, and that we have to work through to arrive at that position, which is based on a bit of analysis, based on a bit of grappling with grappling with the idea of slowing things down. I think in Facts Matter we use the word pause. We like to hit the pause button, which in a scrolling culture is in itself quite an ambitious thing to do. I think this is part of one of the challenges, isn't it, of social media, is that the speed that this stuff is happening at is incredible, like a freight train coming at us, and being able to do exemplar work is actually part of the key task. So I'm conscious now that we have, we're into our last 15 minutes, so I'd invite our speakers, Catherine and certainly Orla and Joan, that we have an open space, an open platform. Nobody, from what I've seen, has thrown in any questions for us to grapple with, but I certainly have a few things in my mind I'd love to put out there for conversation. Certainly if anybody wants to put their hand up to interject, I suspect certainly our speakers have plenty of food for thought as well, based on listening to the others. A couple of things stick with me, and I'm happy to put these out for people to push back on. But I think Joe mentioned it was about reading the world is an important part of the practice of engaging with the material. So it isn't just about the principles of knowing what you should do, but it's actually taking problem questions and real problems to work through. I think that's a really important reflection, and I think certainly from our perspectives when we were developing the resource, some key ideas came out for us, including climate shocks and the climate crisis. How do you tackle hate and hate speech, but also how do you de-escalate hate speech rather than just being able to call it out? I think it's this idea of moving beyond just seeing what it is and thinking about what you can do is actually a really important component of the ingredients of actually progress and progressing beyond what might be a reading on the first instance. I think as Catherine said, it's about what you do with the fact that you have been confronted by something, rightly or wrongly, but it's about what you do next, and it's about those opportunities. Look, I'm very happy for anyone to put their hands up. If Catherine, if you feel particularly moved or interested in responding to some of that, you're very welcome to. And certainly Orla and Joan as well. Yeah, so look, I'll leave the space there, but for anybody who would like to put their hands up or go for it. But for me, reading the world is an interesting challenge for us to not forget that the theory is important and understanding is important, but we need to, it's the application of it is actually really challenging, particularly when we're, 20, 30 years ago, I suppose it was through television and print, but now we have to be able to read very cleverly coded visual material, whether it's a meme, whether it's a photograph that's being manipulated, whether it's a GIF and moving images, whether it's a video that gets manipulated as well. And the access that people have to do that has only increased the challenge of actually literacy work around these questions. But yeah, I'm happy for anyone to respond to that. I think, Orla, I can see you nodding your head there. If you're interested in commenting on that or following through on a comment, you're very welcome as well.
Yeah, I suppose lots of interesting points raised there in the last hour. As you say, we're kind of constantly bombarded now. Most of us, myself included, spend a large portion of their day staring at their phone for work and other reasons. So you can't really get away from information in the same way you used to. Perhaps, you might watch the news at 6 p.m. or 9 p.m. and buy a daily newspaper. For a lot of people, that's not how they consume news anymore. It's not the only way they consume news. They still do that, but they have a device very often in their hand or in their pocket that's constantly, bringing up new information. So it's much harder to kind of switch off from information. A lot of it can be good information and correct information, but a lot of it is not. It's false information, or it's half true, or it's, designed to scare people for whatever reason, or to, push forward a certain agenda by whoever has created it or is initially sharing it. So I suppose, again, it kind of goes back to all of the questions you should ask yourself when something pops up on your phone. The biggest one being, what is the source? Who is the source? Is it someone I've heard of? Is it reputable? Is there some mad claim made in the headline or the article, but then they don't actually reference what the source is or where they're getting this information? So, I suppose just stop and take a minute to think. If someone's forwarded something and you're kind of saying, well, I better forward it to, I don't think it's right, but maybe it is, and that might affect, maybe it's something about school closures, for example. So I go, well, I better send it to my daughter because she has kids in school, just in case it's true. So then the more often something is shared, the more likely people think, well, like 3 people have actually forwarded this to me now, so it's probably like there must be something in it. So I suppose just pause and maybe look at Facts Matter, look at the journal, look at the IFCN, that's the International Fact Checking Network. They have really good resources there that fact check national and international stories. If you're ever kind of thinking, this doesn't seem right, but I'm not sure, a quick Google, very often something has already been fact checked. So just to be aware that, if something doesn't sound right, it's probably not right.
Great, thanks for that, Orla. Some wonderful reference points there, and I think we've got some really good reference points today. I think the International Fact Checking Network is a really interesting one for educators to look at for all the reasons Orla said. And I know they've produced a map, and on that map they show legislation and initiatives to tackle misinformation and disinformation. So if you're curious as to what's going on elsewhere, there's a really interesting map that you can find on the IFCN website, and it gets updated. It's a fascinating one. But some great comments in there. I know there's some comments in the chat, so I might just mention those as well. And you know, Catherine, Joan, feel free to intervene at any point. I think someone said, thanks very much for the presentations. Sorry I have to leave. Useful space to think. I think that's really interesting in itself. We don't always get a chance to actually think. We're kind of constantly moving. Someone else here said, really informative speakers. Very much enjoyed their contributions. It's important to keep these narratives going. Well done to all involved. I think Paula asked a question. She said, I find one of the problems is that if you do try to suggest people examine other sources, that part of the whole idea of discrediting news is that traditional platforms are regarded as untrustworthy. So there's a challenge there about that critical dimension of being critical means how do you ever arrive at truth? I think, you know, I know Scott has left a comment as well in the comments, and I'm aware Scott was involved in the in a resource many years ago called Half the Lives Are True. And that's, I think there's a part of that phrasing that I think reminds me also of phrasing that's used in and suggested in education is, you know, trying to find the kernel of truth, is that, you know, you collect enough resources along the way, or you engage with a number of news agencies, and, you know, you're trying to find what's the core truth at the heart of this. I think that's a good reminder as well, that you're not just looking at things, but you're trying to find something, and being curious as to the essence of it is actually really important. So sorry, I think Rosario was saying the acronym, the International Fact Checking Network, the IFCN, that's that acronym there. So I think that's mostly the comments. Oh, thanks, Orla, for sharing that. I just see that. So if anybody else has any questions, feel free to throw them in. Catherine or Joan, if you have any other comments you'd like to make, you're very welcome to. Yep. So I think Rosario here is saying, believe none of what you hear and half of what you see, is a nun used to tell us. So there you go. So all kinds of wisdom arrives in terms of not just knowing how things work, but it's about what you do and what you can do, and it's that confidence to engage and to produce things. You know, one of the things about media literacy that I think can get left aside is this idea that you actually produce as part of media literacy. You don't just consume. You are producers in terms of the media content. So posting and so on is part of that. And I think the confidence to do that in action is actually very important. And it's that activating behavior and being able to respond and being confident to respond is part of, I think, this important space that we work in. Catherine, Joan, I feel like I'm talking plenty, but you're very welcome to have a comment before Helen does a wrap up. Yep.
There was actually a wonderful quote in the book, The Facts Matter. Think before you click. Absolutely brilliant. Very, very good. Yeah. Very, very simply put, but very effective.
Yeah, and I suppose just to wrap up, you know, it's important again to try and keep it positive, I suppose, and just break it down, you know, to the skills that we can work on and build it up from there, because it is such a huge topic, and there is so much, even in terms of information that, you know, even as tutors, we can feel under pressure that we need to know everything about, you know, whatever it is, climate change or vaccination or COVID or whatever, and nobody can. So it's a work in progress for all of us, and we have to know that, and, you know, we're working through the information to arrive at the best, you know, that we can, like you're talking about what we can do, that we can do today, and what's possible for us now in our time now that we can do. But to try and think of it in terms of enabling and upskilling and what's possible.
Thanks for that, Joan. And thanks for that, Catherine. And thanks, Orla, as well. I think we could be here for quite some time. And that just, I think, reflects the material and how close it is to us, and how live it is as an ongoing challenge for all of us in education, public education, as well as in formal education context. So thank you, everybody. Helen, I'll pass the mantle over to you so you can give a wrap up. I'm just going to wave around my print copy of Facts Matter. And for those interested, I'll let Helen do the sell. It's there, but by all means, there's plenty of other places you can check out on this material too. So over to you, Helen. Thanks. Thanks.
Great, thanks Tony, and again to Catherine, Orla and Joan as well. I hope people found it interesting. We wanted to just give a bit of variety to the hour to launch this really good and hopefully useful guide. So again, the download is there and you can contact us for a copy as well. I suppose when we met and when we discussed this, there are a lot of media literacy resources, particularly for young people out there. And Tony's particular work, he'd worked a lot with secondary schools and with young people. And we sort of felt that there was a gap of tutor resourcing and indeed student resources as well. And that's why I suppose the idea and the germ of this came about. And we spent some really good time with tutors in the National Tutors Forum, and then we were delighted to get out to Bray. And then of course COVID happened, so we had to spend a lot of our time writing this through Zoom and different pieces. So it is a work in progress, and that I really hope people find it useful. I hope you will take bits of it. So there's session plans, there's handouts, there's information, everything changes. So I'm sure some of the stuff in here we've even written, Tony will probably have gone out of date, and there'll be other tweets and articles that you'll be able to use. But I suppose we really want to just get this out there now, offer and say to you, please use it within your learning environments, whatever way you want, integrate it in, go with the 10 weeks or the 10 sessions. And really importantly, we'd love to get some feedback, because we did have to write it in a bit of isolation because we couldn't run classes over Zoom. We would have done a lot more on the ground with tutors and learners, and we didn't. But we think it's a really good start. There's a lot there in what we've sort of summarised, listening to Catherine's points. Joan's points were really useful and interesting, and Orla's. And I suppose the last thing to say is that all of us need to upskill our media literacy and digital skills. And that came through when we did these workshops with the tutors. There was a lot of, I'm not sure what I should do or what I should say. And we've all been caught. I mean, I sent stuff around at the very beginning of the pandemic that I stupidly, didn't go, and I don't mean to put myself down, I didn't go and check the facts. So all of us need to stop and think, I think Catherine's point there, and wait before we like anything or we share anything to check that we're sharing fact, and then be clear the difference between fact and opinion. So lots of times we have opinions, but they're, what's that based on? And we just hope that this guide will help all of us critically think a little bit better. And we've a couple of other things coming in November. We're going to run another workshop. We'll open it up to people called Debunked. So it's more of a workshop where you can actually engage with some of the text, because today we're sort of presenting to you. And I hope you enjoy it. And really, we'll take any feedback. It doesn't matter if you think one exercise was rubbish and didn't work out. We'd like to hear that. And if you thought one exercise really worked, or you tweaked it, please feedback. So with that, we will send an email. Fergus will send an email to thank you all for coming. We will send you on the link to the guide again and a short evaluation. And please, again, fill us in about anything you feel Nala could be doing around media literacy, this space, this digital critical thinking space. If there's any other suggestions you have. And with our new strategy, the government has a new 10-year strategy. And I think that media literacy and digital and critical thinking skills really needs to be an essential part of that. And wish all of the tutors and learners the best with going through it, and enjoy it. And thank you very much for coming today. Fergus.